destruction of the first temple, of the second temple, and other sort of big, enormous tragedies in Jewish time, going back to the destruction of the first temple over 2,500 years ago, continuing into modern time. So what the day sort of holds is it's sort of this moment for all of the Jewish community to sort of sit in semi-mourning to mark. And so it's sort of like, it's like the lowest, darkest moment in Jewish time is Tisha B'Av. But then immediately after that, the Shabbat that comes after Tisha B'Av is called Shabbat Nachamu, which means Shabbat of comfort. And so we pivot very quickly from being in this sort of deep, dark place of mourning, of grief, of loss, of really like sitting with those feelings, which are important to feel and to be in. But then shifting to comfort and looking ahead. And we have this pivot where the Jewish time basically starts going up. We take comfort, and then we start getting excited. And it leads us all the way into what? What do you think? What's the high point of the Jewish calendar?
Rosh Hashanah?
Yeah, the high holy days. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is like the highest, right? So we go from the low and then we pivot very quickly back up. So we're like, this moment in time is like that pivot where we go from like low to taking comfort and going back up. So the question I just want to start with for y'all to answer before we get into some text is just to think about when you're in need of comfort, when you are sad, upset, feeling loss, grief, right? All those kinds of feelings. What is the comfort that you need? What does that look like for you? Rebecca?
Recently, I've started singing.
Hmm.
I've been taking a vocal training class. I'm not a singer. I have no training, but I'm taking a vocal training class through Emeritus College, and I'm finding that's giving me some comfort.
Yeah. What about it is comforting for you, do you think?
I don't know, because I'm just discovering that now. I don't know if it's the resonance in my head or my chest. It's the sound of the music. I don't know what it is yet. I'm just sitting with it right now.
Okay, but the power of music, maybe like some kind of activity, right? Like kind of getting out of your head and doing something, maybe something like that. And like that also like expresses what you're feeling, that allows you to kind of get it out there. I'm guessing. I don't know. But maybe we'll go with that. What else? Yeah,
Just
Merle?
relaxing, maybe reading a book, not running around or being with anyone.
So pausing, having a little time to read, do something that because relaxing means, it's interesting, right? Like I think relaxing means very different things to different people.
For sure.
But for you, right? Like it's more that kind of like quiet, alone time, maybe some like reflection, introspection, but just kind of taking a breath, taking a beat. Okay, great. What else? Susan?
I think it depends on what you need comfort for, what the circumstances may be. Well, during this recent war, this current ongoing war, it was very, very upsetting, and sleepless nights. So for me, it was starting to give more to Jewish organizations who are trying to combat that, and to any other groups that would be not combating, sticking up for the Jews. So that's an active thing for that.
Right.
Now,
So taking.
there's also a personal tragedy, but personal things, and I think Rebecca has a good point for singing. For that would, I guess it could be communal as well. But I've lost my voice, so for me, it would be a tragedy if I started singing, because I'm not a tragedy, but not very comforting. But there are other things then for personal. One, if you have a loss or something, is to I found to do something to not eradicate, but to ameliorate what that loss for others might be, or for yourself. And then yeah, I see for recently with this heat, swimming has been very soothing, interestingly enough. But that's only in the heat. So I think it depends on what kind of uh, soothing you need.
Yeah. So, but again, I think, right, like a little like activity, getting out of your head, getting your body moving, being active. Great. Cindy, have your hand raised? Cindy?
I think focusing on gratitude. Can you hear me? I have internet problems right now. Focusing on hope and gratitude.
Okay, so hope and gratitude. So trying to say like optimistic, focusing on the positive things. Okay. What else? Who had Susan, you have your hand raised again?
Oh yeah, talking with friends, connect with other people is another one.
Right, like reaching out to others, right? Like having support, having community. That's a huge thing when when you're feeling down. Absolutely. Merle, did you want to add something else?
I just wanted to say this morning, my husband met somebody in his coffee group that I've known since I was like 10 years old, who used to belong to Wilshire Boulevard Temple, who moved here a few years ago. And it's just been an amazing day with all these emails and text messages going back and forth. Today is my grandmother's yahrzeit. So yeah, I'm being kind of quiet and reflective. And this kind of put me in another realm, all this conversation with him all day.
Yeah, sometimes we're tempted to kind of to shut people out or shut down. And sometimes, there's a difference between what we might want and what we actually need. Great. All right, so I want to shift to the text we're going to look at. So for today, what we're going to take a look at is the key texts for Tisha B'Av and then the key text for Shabbat Nachamu. So for Tisha B'Av, the text is Eicha, is Lamentations, the book of Lamentations, which is actually poetry describing the historical moment when the first temple was destroyed. So we'll read through that to get a sense of like what were the feelings, because I forget who said it, maybe Susan said that like there's different kinds of grief, there's different types of feeling, reasons to feel down, so we can sort of take a look at what is the emotional experience described here. And then we're going to look at the text for Shabbat Nachamu, which is the Haftarah, which comes from Isaiah chapter 40, which begins, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, take comfort, my people. And this is the part where in the book of Isaiah, one of the prophetic books, where God is speaking to the Jewish people and saying, and this is after the destruction of the first temple and after the exile to Babylonia, that God is saying, return, come back, take comfort. Like you sinned, you had to be punished, but now like I'm taking you back, and be comforted and return. So the texts are kind of talking to each other in a certain way. But I want us again just to kind of reflect on what's the emotional experience that we're seeing described here. And then how does the sort of comforting text, does it seem like it's a good fit? Is it going to be comforting for that experience? Is it something familiar to you all and your experiences with that? And just sort of like, how does it fit together? Any questions? All right, great. I'm going to pull up the text now. All right. So we're going to begin with Eicha. So this is poetry. So if it seems a little, both texts are poetic, which is it's always I always really love reading the like poetic text from Tanakh. It's a little more symbolic, metaphorical, but I think there's a lot of really beautiful pieces for us to take a look at. All right, so this is the beginning of the Book of Lamentations, Eicha, and actually the name for the book comes from the first word, Eicha, which means it's translated here as the last, but a more literal translation is like how? Like, how could this happen? All right, does anyone want to start reading the text for us? Panina, you have your hand raised? No? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So can I start?
Go for it.
Ready? Where it says one?
Yes.
Alas, lordly sits the city, once great with people. She that was great among nations is become like a widow, the princess among states. It is become a thrall. Bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheek wet with tears. There is none to comfort her. Of all her friends, all her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foes. Judah has gone into exile because of misery and harsh oppression. When she settled among the nations, she found no rest. All her pursuers overlook her in the narrow places.
We'll pause for a second. So here's the first question. Who is she? Who is her? Who's the female
The
character?
city, Jerusalem.
Exactly. So this is
Or the
Jerusalem.
nation at all. Could be also the nation.
So it could be, right? So also thinking about, right, like Jerusalem like Jerusalem in itself is a metaphor for the people of Israel in general.
Right.
What the character is described, we'll see it a little later, is also known as Bat Zion, right? Like daughter Zion. So again, Jerusalem, this place. All right, let's keep reading here.
Zion roads are in mourning, empty of festival pilgrims. All her gates are deserted. Her priests sigh. Her maidens are unhappy. She is utterly disconsolate. Her enemies are now the masters. Her foes are at ease because the Lord has afflicted her for her many transgressions. Her infants have gone into captivity before the enemy. Gone from fair Zion are all. That were her glory. Her leaders were like stags that found no pasture. They could only walk feebly, before the pursuer. All the precious things she had in the days of old, Jerusalem recalled in her days of war and sorrow, when her people fell by enemy hands with none to help her, when enemies looked on her and gloated over her downfall.
All right, we'll pause there for a second. So what's the feeling? What are the main emotions, feelings that are coming out in this section?
Pretty down and desperate, and loss and defeat, and things are gone. The good times are gone.
Right. I think the imagery of the roads are empty. There's no pilgrims heading to the festivals, right? They're not traveling to the temple to celebrate Sukkot and Shavuot and Pesach, right? They're all scattered. They're all gone. It's gone silent. Panina, what do you want to add?
You want me to keep on reading?
Not just yet. No, not just yet. I want to hear
okay.
other
I want
folks
to say
have
something.
Mm-hmm.
I like to do this the wordsick by Penny Press, and on the top of each page they have something that they teach you. So on one of the books there was a page with all the counties that the Romans conquered. It was a whole page full of like 3 rows of counties and people, and and nations that the Roman conquered. So sometimes, you know, when you when you look at all those books of the prophets and things, there is a big motif there always that the people did something wrong, or the nation was at default, or there was a internal unrest or whatever, and they justify it that that's why the Roman succeeded, or the Assyrians. If you would have read in that penny book, there was a page full of those counties that the Roman took and conquered. You cannot, sometimes you cannot put the blame on the people that they did something wrong, because they were so huge and so strong. Like the page was full of counties and counties and countries that they conquered. So a lot of times when I'm looking at those texts and all this self-punishment and beating, sometimes maybe that's not the case why they were conquered, because they were bad necessarily. And I wish people, when they read it, will be also aware of what the enemy was capable of doing, that we, because we were so righteous and the contrary and believing in justice, we were most of the time the self of all this, what was going on.
Yeah, so I think
So
I think something
not always is in place. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes. So I think as well, right? And part of and so again, right, like, so this text is talking about the destruction of the first temple, right? So this was the Babylonians in 586.
Same thing. Do you know what the Assyrians did?
Hold on, Penina, hold on.
Okay.
So as the Assyrians and the Babylonians were different people. So this is in talking particularly about Jerusalem. And I think this raises a good question of when we have these texts that are part of, also, I think, when we experience loss, we ask the question, that's the opening question of the book, is how, why would this happen?
Right.
And so a lot of these writings and the prophetic work is trying to put an explanation to it, right? If they say the Jewish people have a covenant with God, who is the strongest God of the universe, who looks after us as God's special people, how is it that this could happen? And some of the answers that they came up with was, it's because we were at fault. It's because we were to blame, which may or may not. There's some instances where there might have been some political gambling with these giant empires that was not wise and was a little arrogant and was a little much for this small country. But also, like, it's a way to keep intact that God is still the most powerful. God does still love us. We just did wrong. And that's why this is happening right now. But I think that's a big question that we ask all the time when things that are challenging happen to us, to the world, to people we love, that we ask, like, why would this happen? How could this happen? And we try to make meaning out of it. All right, why don't we jump to someone else want to read a little bit more from Eicha, Lamentations?
Yeah. No, I will.
Susan, go ahead.
Jerusalem has greatly sinned, therefore she has become a mockery. All who admire her despise her, for they have seen her disregard, and she can only sigh and shrink back. Her uncleanness clings to her skirts. She gave no thought to her future. She has sunk appallingly, with none to comfort her. See, O Lord, my misery, how the enemies jeer. See, O Lord, and behold how abject I have become. May it never befall you, all who pass along the road, look about and see. Is there any agony like mine, which was dealt out to me when the Lord afflicted me on this day of wrath? And here he's blaming God and blaming the people. Blaming the people and then God as retribution.
Yeah.
The Lord in my midst has rejected all my heroes. He has proclaimed a set time against me to crush my young men. As in a press, the Lord has trodden fair maiden Judah. For these things do I weep. My eyes flow with tears. Far from me is any comforter who might revive my spirit. My children are forlorn, for the foe has prevailed. Zion spreads out her hands. She has no one to comfort her. The Lord has summoned against Jacob his enemies all about him. Jerusalem has become among them a thing unclean.
All right. So why don't we pause there for a second? So if we go to this speech, right? So now, because they're talking about Bat Zion, they're talking about Jerusalem. Again, that's a metaphor, right? But talking about her in the third person. And now she speaks for herself. So what is it that she has to say?
See how miserable I am. And it's interesting, Jerusalem is a woman and also a fallen woman. The metaphor continues throughout. It's never masculine, it's a feminine, you know. And some countries have masculine, like Germans, to which this also relates. Anyway, so here it is the Jerusalem speaking, or it could be Jeremiah.
So this is Jerusalem. This is Bat Zion who's speaking.
Okay, but it's Jerusalem speaking through the mouth of Jeremiah, correct?
Well, it's the character of Jerusalem, right? Yeah. Is that right? Like we're imagining, like if we're reading, like let's imagine we're reading a play, right? And you have the chorus, the narrator is talking about something, and now someone is speaking for themselves.
So it's a personification, and it comes.
Exactly.
But this is such a vivid portrayal of abject poverty, abject misery, and of the humans, which we'll come to, the human struggle with God. And I got, you know, why? I mean, this why thing is certainly continuing over time, and I think, I mean, this pertains somewhat to the Holocaust, because there's some that the Jews were at fault, but others not. So, and why did it happen? And is there an answer? Probably not. Or
right. There's this continued question of why would this happen? And I think there's something really powerful here as well that we see multiple times, that she says, like, see, look at me, look at this misery, look at this pain. And when I think about like the experience that we have when we're grieving, I think we either have the feeling of like, look away, like, don't look at me, don't see me like this. Or we have the feeling of like, no, see me in my pain, see that I'm suffering, see that I'm feeling all these things. Don't be apathetic and just ignore me. Jonathan, you want to add something?
Well, yeah, I wanted to say that the like Jerusalem being a woman, isn't that sort of consistent with Song of Songs, where you have the king and his bride as a sort of a metaphor of God and humanity, and that, you know, aren't there a lot of references throughout the literature of sort of Israel being like a wife to a husband or father kind of thing, showing the relationship between God and man?
Yes, so there's a lot of metaphors. So there's something called like the marriage metaphor, which you see in Ezekiel, you see in Hosea, where the description is God, right? God is the groom, and the people of Israel are the bride, or their husband and wife, right? Because they have come together through the covenant, i.e., a ketubah, right? That links them together. And so you get the metaphor is often for Israel does tend to be the feminine. There are other examples when it can be different things, but that is something that you'll see. And also, if you think in general, right, like when cities, not just Jerusalem, not just in the Jewish tradition, are turned into metaphors, like they're often cities and countries tend to be a feminine metaphor. Like if you want to think of like France, if you want to think of, you know, the Statue of Liberty, you want to think of, right, that often that's what it comes to be.
I got you. And then the other question about the guilt. So my understanding of so Lamentations is from Jeremiah, and Jeremiah basically was around during the reign of King Josiah, where they like found the Torah or more of the Torah or something that had been lost, and that caused the Josiah reform.
So Jeremiah is later.
Yeah, so Jeremiah came out after that, right? Like they found that, and Jeremiah was running around and saying, "Hey, we haven't been following the laws of God," and he was, uh, uh, and then he was put in jail for like 20 years or something like that.
So Jeremiah, so there's about 150-year gap there between. So Jeremiah was prophesying around the time of the end of, like, let's call it 600 BCE. Josiah was about 100 years before that. So it's a slightly different, but Jeremiah was there during the destruction of the first temple.
But he was sort of preaching like, hey, we found these laws and we haven't been following them and we have to follow them, and nobody listened to him. And so
not quite. But
okay.
but the prophets do preach often that they say, like, you're not following the rules. Like, there are laws here. And that's where it comes back to the idea of sin that you see in all the in Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah, in Amos and Hosea, like, there are things we're supposed to be doing here, guys, and we're not doing it, and God's going to get super mad at us for not doing it. But what Jeremiah is more is his feeling is more of, like, he's the prophet who is more like distraught. Like, he sees the destruction of the first temple, and he's like, his mission is to stay in the land and continue to prophesy to people. And as he like says to God, like, I don't want this task. Like, this is too miserable to be stuck here. So there is a question of whether or not, in a traditional sense, Eicha is attributed to Jeremiah, which may or may not be the case from a historical perspective, but we do know that these texts are coming from people who were there at the time, right? And these are the things that the people who experienced what was happening during the destruction of the first temple and the exile were experiencing and were feeling, for sure.
Right. So then, like the guilt of Israel or Judah, I guess in this case, is like it's really not in question, right? I mean, it's mostly like sort of what is the effect of the punishment? Was the punishment so intense, and did it accomplish anything? Here we have the city ruined and all that. What did that accomplish? But the guilt, that's not really in question, is it?
Wait, say that again. Was the guilt a question?
Israel's guilt, or whether it was deserving. That's what we were talking about before, and that was one of the points that made me want to comment. Was I didn't really think that it was in question. There's a lot to discuss or contemplate in terms of the intensity of the punishment and what effect it had, and all of this sort of stuff. But it wasn't like it wasn't their fault, like, I mean, it was an actual, they did bring this on themselves, by disobeying God. Right. I mean,
so that's right. Like, that's the religious perspective, right? That's what these prophets are saying, is that, we were told that there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And when you do right, you have blessings. And when you do wrong, you have curses. And this is actually the section of Torah that we're in right now, or we're coming into now as well. And so when, I think this is a very like human response. You see tragedy happening, you see destruction, right? Like, you have an army coming in, destroying your city, destroying your sacred temple, deporting, huge like groups of your population. And you're looking around and you're saying, what happened here? And why would this happen? And so part of what these religious figures, right, which is what these prophets were, who were there to try to speak truth and to like encourage the people down a better, more ethical path. They're saying, this happened because you sinned. So get it together and God will take us back. Okay. And so it's interesting is that Lamentations is actually it's interesting. It's not a prophetic text. Like, it's not prophesying what's going to happen in the future. It's a text just of like present pain. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
not, so it's saying, like, it's still trying to make meaning, right? And that's a lot of, like, when you're grieving and you're in loss, like, you're trying to make meaning out of what's happening. But this is much more like a text of, like, the experience of personal pain and grief
Gotcha.
than a religious directive per se. All right,
Gotcha.
so yes, but great question. All right, so what, and then we'll go to Isaiah, which is prophecy. So first, so I want to go back to this question of what's the emotional impact of Eicha, of Lamentations? Like, is it anything that you can relate to? Anything like that's familiar? Like what's emotionally happening here? Merle, you want to go ahead?
It's just sad. And where's it going to go? The wondering of where it's going to go from here.
Yeah, right. Like you're in such a dark, terrible place.
Like what happens next?
Yeah. And I think that's a question that we ask, when tragedy strikes, when bad things happen, that we say, okay, what next? What do we do? Great, absolutely. Susan, you want to go ahead?
Haven't even gotten to some of the most horrendous portions of this. Cannibalism and women eating their and starvation and people withering. It is really one of the most horrendous texts of all, and even more so because it's apparently from a witness of these terrible events in real time.
Well, maybe. Again, keeping in mind that this is poetic. This is not meant to be a historical record.
Okay,
this is a poetic expression.
Yes.
So we don't know, but most of it is metaphor.
Okay.
But it's like the worst case examples, right? Of like, especially if we think, right, we start with the female imagery, right? Like, what is the worst thing that we might imagine women, mothers would experience, right?
And children, and then also like whoredom is also part of it too, that, they are desecrated and stripped. It's just really an ugly picture. So
yeah. Right. And there's also, like, as you go on, there's also stronger like rape imagery, things that aren't said, right? Like that, again, like if we imagine, like, again, the lived experience of what happens when armies come in and invade vulnerable cities. And then also taking that, and then metaphorically as well, of thinking like this sacred, special city and temple that has been desecrated and profaned, right? Like the metaphor that goes along with it. I did once, a couple of years ago, a Tisha B'Av program that compared Eicha with, right, like these sections, especially the part where Bat Zion is talking with women from the Me Too movement who were telling their stories. And so the same kind of idea of like, look at this pain, hear this pain, don't turn away from it. Like you have to hear what has happened in grief. So there's really powerful imagery there. All right, so if this is the emotional experience that we're coming from, right? This is the emotional experience that was, if we think about in our own week, in our own Jewish liturgical calendar, this was Monday night and Tuesday. We were in that low place, right? This was the shared communal experience of the Jewish people across the world, was looking at these texts. And then we pivot to the Haftarah for this week that starts, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, take comfort, my people. So Isaiah 40 actually comes from a section of Isaiah that is immediately after the return, right? So there has been the destruction of the temple and the exile to Babylonia. Almost a full, not a complete generation, but about a generation later, the people are allowed to return back, rebuild the temple, rebuild life in the land of Israel. And this is a text, like this is God speaking. So if Lamentations is the people speaking to God, this is God responding and giving a you know, you have said that, right? This is what you're saying. This is what your experience. Here's what I have to say to you. All right. Would someone like to read this section for Isaiah?
I guess I can read it.
Okay.
Comfort, oh, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and declare to her that her term of service is over, that her iniquity is expiated, for she has received at God's hand double for all her sins. A voice rings out, clear in the desert, a road for God, level in the wilderness, a highway for our God. Let every valley be raised, every hill and mountain made low. Let the rugged ground become level and the ridges become a plain. The presence of God shall appear, and all flesh as one shall behold. For God has spoken, a voice rings out, proclaim. Another, what shall I proclaim? All flesh is grass, all goodness is like flowers of the field. Grass withers, flowers fade, when God's breath blows on them. Indeed, when God's breath blows on them. Indeed, people are but grass. Grass withers, flowers fade, but the word of our God is always fulfilled. Ascend a lofty mountain, O herald of joy to Zion. Raise your voice with power, O herald of joy to Jerusalem. Raise it, have no fear. Announce to the cities of Judah, behold your God. Behold, my sovereign God comes in might, whose arm wins triumph. See, God has brought along the reward. The recompense is in view. Like a shepherd who pastures the flock, gathers up the lambs and carries them in the divine bosom, while gently driving the mother sheep.
Okay, let's wait here, hold on. Let's pause there for a second. Great. So what is there anything like familiar? Is there anything that seems to like there's some not parallel, but like similarities or connections with with Eicha? Any keywords or ideas or imagery? Panina?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a city is always in grammar, in the Hebrew grammar, is always a feminine. So is a country. It's because they hold people like a mother holds a child. So if you were talking before about the gender that they're given to cities, that's why they're always either being compared to a mother or to a sister or to a woman, beloved woman. That's why. It's like people are coming and going. It's somebody bearing children. They go up, they leave the house, they come back. It's a container of life. And that's why it's feminine, always in grammar. That's that part of that. Second, I want to add that those books were kept actually to teach us what worked and what not. There was a reason for keeping scrolls and study them over and over and over again. When the Dead Sea was discovered in the caves, scholars from all over the world examined them. And I know that the person that I saw there, that I recognized his writings and knew who he was Albright. And the reason that it was studied, they were looking to see if Jesus' name was mentioned in the old scrolls. They didn't find it. So there is a reason why those scrolls are being kept. It's a lesson. It's read it and learn.
Exactly. All right.
Learn
Ben,
life, not just the stories.
Exactly. Ben, you had a hand raised?
Thank you, Rabbi. I mean, you asked what was similar here from the other section. This seems quite a flip-flop here. The hills become flat and the roads are straight and easy, and this is the good times versus
Right.
the other.
So here's my question, right? Like you're right. In many ways, it's a flip-flop, but there's like things that are like, for instance, like, do we notice, are there any words, any metaphors that like are doing one thing in Eicha, but then we see them again in this text that are doing something different, but it's like the same metaphor or the same word. What about Jerusalem? Do we see Jerusalem?
Well, her iniquity is expiated, which is the opposite there. She had iniquity before. Now she's received God's hand before God abandoned her. I see that, as the contrasting thing, which they often do in the Torah too, don't they? I mean, maybe in the prophets, but it stated one thing here, and then it's stated in other words here, but it also could be the opposite for the Tokeka, the blessings and the punishment are opposites as well, stated in that one Parshat. I don't remember which one, but I see Jerusalem is now spoken to tenderly, and
Right,
her sins
exactly.
are forgiven, expiated, wiped away.
Right, it's the same character, right? It's Jerusalem, it's Bat Zion, but in Eicha, she's being punished, she's miserable, she's doing this. And now God says, you've been punished, you've gone through misery, and now, right, I'm going to speak tenderly to you. I'm going to comfort you. You've paid your dues, right? You've been punished, and now return, come back. Right? Take comfort. What else? Is there anything else that you notice? Again, like it's not, I don't mean parallel in terms of like it's describing the exact same thing, but it's responding to things that were in Eicha. Anything else? How does here? So us, Merle, yeah.
I think it's more accepting of God.
What
I don't
do
know
you mean
any
by
other
that?
way to say it as far as having a better relationship with God, but more accepting of God rather than feeling like everything is bad or down.
So
more positive.
Right? Because remember, this is the comfort, right? This is like these things go in, these are an order of events, right? These aren't experiencing the same thing at the same time. There was loss, there was misery, there's tragedy, and now there is this. Exactly. Rebecca?
There's a lot of construction going outside, so if there's some noise, I apologize. There's a carryover of grief. There's grief in Lamentations, and there's still grief here in Isaiah, is what I'm seeing.
Where are you seeing the grief?
Line 6, a voice says, cry.
A voice rings out, proclaim.
Oh, okay. My version says, cry. The same thing. What shall I proclaim? That's still kind of
like there's confusion. There's still sort of like, what are we, somebody else was saying this too, and it's sort of like, what, when something bad happens, you say like, what next? What do we do next, right? God says proclaim, and we say, like, what do we even proclaim? You're right, and we're still seeing grief, but we're seeing like a comforting of the grief, like trying to respond to it. So how might we view this as, and then actually let's read, let's go back, let's actually pick up this this section as well. Does someone want to read just this part right here? Rebecca, go for it.
I think maybe a better word I could have used was, instead of grief, was disbelief. If they're still in a disbelief.
Right, like shock, confusion, right? You go from like that feeling of like loss and pain, and it's like it's someone is trying to comfort you, and you're sort of like, how do I come out of this? Right. Do you want to read for us on verse 12 here?
Who measured the waters with the hands hollow, and gauged the skies with the span, and meted earth's dust with a measure, and weighed the mountains with a scale, and the hills with a balance? Who has plumbed the mind of God? Can anyone disclose God's plan? Whom did God consult, and who bestowed understanding, providing guidance in the way of right? Who guided God in knowledge and made known the path of wisdom?
So why don't we pause there? That's okay. Well, we don't need to get to all the rest of the text. So what is this what does this part of it seem to be talking about? What's it getting at? Susan, you talking? Wait, Susan, you got to unmute.
Okay. Talking about the grandeur, the power, the awesome majesty of God who created the universe, really. It is talking about the waters. God scooped it out with his hands and measured the span of the sky, and meted earth's dust. So this is a God as all powerful, but also interestingly has a little bit of the engineer in him, plumbing, and I think that was what William Blake depicted in his image of God, bending over and measuring the earth with a compass. But it's, it's a Job kind of thing too. Who was responsible for this universe?
Right. There's a plan, right? There's a method behind it. And are we as human beings, like, right, who can disclose God's plan, right? Who knows what God was thinking, what God came up with, what God was being guided by? And I think this goes back to that question of making meaning in the case of loss, right? That we try to say, like, why did this happen? Was there a message in it, right? Was it something that was actually there to help me or to guide me? And so there's this, I think this is kind of responding to that as well and saying, we don't know, like, who knows what God intended here? Who knows what the plan was here? Because God works in mysterious ways, right? And I think that it goes back to that question of meaning in times of tragedy, and trying to take comfort by making sense of everything. And what they're saying here, take comfort. There's a sense to everything, right? There's a meaning to everything. You just may not know it, but God has put it there. And how are you to know the mind of God? All right. So of the Isaiah text that we're looking at, how does it seem like it is comforting, like comparing to the experience that we saw in Eicha and Lamentations, and this is meant to be in response, in comfort to that experience? Does it seem like it is comforting? Does it seem like it is not enough? What does it seem like to y'all? Susan?
I have a question to ask. As I was talking about this, it occurs to me, which came first, Isaiah or Job?
Isaiah.
Isaiah. So, okay, good. Thank you.
And this is something that we see in we also see kind of like hints of it in Proverbs as well, of just this idea, like the world was created by God with wisdom and with a plan and structure. And we can't really know it. We just have to sort of seek out the wisdom that's attainable for us. So how else does it seem like this text does it seem like it would be comforting to Bat Zion in Eicha? Merle?
I think you have to allow it to be comforting or to give you a path. I think if you're if you think of it in the beginning when all the bad things were happening, then, and you don't want to get past that, then it's not going to help. But I think it's meant to be helpful in a way that you can find a path for yourself and for your community.
Right? You have to be open to comfort. You have to be willing. And I think one of the really powerful things about Tisha B'Av and Eicha is like what they're trying to say is like you can't be ready to be comforted until you've been able to like wail, right? Until you've been able to because when something bad happens and people come, they're like, it'll be okay, don't worry. It's like it's not okay right now. And it's important to sit with that for a minute. And then eventually, right, be ready to move on, be comforted, move forward in life with yourself, with your community. But you have to have that, you have to be ready for it. You have to do the things to prepare yourself for that first. Yeah. Susan?
Yes, I think of this, too, I think of Harold Kushner. When things happen, bad things happen to people, and to good people, it's not why. And he refuses to answer why they happen, but it's when they happen, how you can react to it and how you can. And interestingly, some things can be a why, that that someone did something awful. He did bungee diving and then was killed on the rock, that to me explains it, or people being careless and drinking and driving. Why did it happen? You crashed and killed somebody because you were drinking and driving. So there are some whys, but it's when people sickness that people have eat the right things and exercise and do everything right, and it still happens. So, or with Kirshner and his child. So, but I think some of this comes from this. So, can anyone tell God's plan? There is some comfort, at least I found some, that there's a benevolent God, and things may happen beyond our knowledge. Now, this is more of an Orthodox and a Reform. We don't have ways of knowing, but there may be some ultimate, you can also think of Olam Haba, some ultimate belief or something from that grief or loss or tragedy. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think hold on. My dog is very upset that the mailman is here. Speaking of tragedies, but something that I like when there are things that happen that are upsetting. I know I find it very comforting to think of that hold that theological perspective of I'm not going to know why, and I shouldn't know why, because I'm limited. I'm finite. There's only a certain amount that my human pea brain can hold, and there are things bigger than and beyond me. And that's comforting sometimes, right? Of just sort of like, it's out of my hands, and all I can do is try to make my way through it and learn from it, right? Without having to worry about control over what happens. Yeah. Penina, you wanted to say something?
Yeah,
Whoop, just unmuted. You just muted yourself. Penina, you muted yourself.
All right, I have the gardeners working, so I do that. Anyhow, I think the thing is that historically, it wakes up maybe people to look at it and see what was different around in the proximity of where we get all these things happening to us. What was different that made things different? Whether we could have helped it or we could not, and it was done by the outside forces that contributed to us being in a certain situation. But I think when you look at that, instead of just saying, oh, God, 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 today we look at it and historians are looking to see who was involved and what did we do about it and how can we look at that and see who was the culprit here, and why didn't we do that, or why did we do something, and learn from it. And they don't just give it to you so you'll sit there. I don't think so. It might be that was the thing, to sit there and pray harder. I think historians are not just sitting and praying harder. They're looking to see what was different and how can they fix it. And that's why it's a good thing that those things are around, to show that, yeah, people do this to each other. So what are we doing? So I look at it that way. So
Right.
there's a lot to learn of how and why. That's why I was saying about the Assyrian. They took all the rich people down in exile. Did you know that? So they wouldn't have money to form another army. So there was a system that people did, just like in the Holocaust. It was systematic. You have to look at those stories and those books and see what was different and how did it happen. It's very, very important in my book.
Right. And I think that when we think about, at the end of the day, what we have control over, right?
Exactly.
And that's a lot of what.
How can we make sure that
So
it doesn't happen again?
Hold on. Well, not necessarily. So sometimes we can figure out how to make things happen differently.
The good things, yes.
And sometimes we learn, and I think
we can, and sometimes we
hold
cannot.
on, Paulina, hold on. I'm trying to bring it home. Paulina,
okay.
I'm going to mute you. I got to bring it home here because it's 1:00. So one of the things that I think is really powerful, and what I wanted to open with, the question of, what do you find comforting when you're going through a challenging time? Because I think ultimately coming back to this question of that, because we know tragedy happens, big, small, it will inevitably happen, most likely more than once in a person's life, to yourself, to people that we love. And the things that we have the power to do is we have the power to comfort. We have the power to be with people in their pain. And then to say, and now what do you need to move forward? And ultimately, that's the lesson of Jewish history for this time, right? We have this communal loss. We have this communal mourning. And then we say, and now we take comfort, we pick ourselves back up, and we keep marching forward, right? And we're going to march, and starting for this Shabbat, right? We're going to march all the way to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So we have started the High Holy Day season. I hope you all are excited. But thank you so much for being here. It's always great to study with y'all. And I hope you have a wonderful Shabbat. Get a little relaxation, a little rest, and looking forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you. Shabbat
Thank you,
shalom.
Rabbi.
Thank you,
Bye-bye, everybody.
Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.